Eleanor Hayes set her baby down in the dust of Dry Creek Station, pressed both hands over her mouth, and screamed into her palms so the child would not hear. 8 months of letters. 3 weeks of travel. A wedding dress folded at the bottom of her trunk. The man who promised to meet her had ridden west the day before. "Ma'am," the station master said behind her, "he left this for the sheriff." Before you ride any farther with this story, please subscribe to the channel and drop your city in the comments so I know how far this tale has traveled today. The train had already pulled away when Eleanor finally understood that nobody was coming. She stood with her boots planted on the warped boards of the platform, her trunk at her hip, and her daughter squirming in the crook of her left arm. One by one, the other passengers had walked off the platform into the arms of husbands, brothers, fathers. A freckled girl had been lifted into the air by a man shouting, "Ruth, you're thinner than a fence rail." An older woman had been pressed into the shoulder of her son. A boy had been handed a lemon drop. And Eleanor had stood there smiling politely at nothing, rehearsing the first sentence she intended to say to the man who had written her 23 letters. The platform was empty now. The station master came out of his shack wiping his neck with a rag. He was a narrow man with sunburned ears and the slow, careful walk of someone who had delivered bad news before. "Ma'am," he said. Eleanor kept her smile in place. She had learned a long time ago that a smile was the last thing a woman could afford to drop. "He's just late," she said. "He wrote that he'd be here at noon. It's barely past." "Ma'am." "I'm sure the roads are dry, or a horse threw a shoe. Mr. Pike is a careful writer. He was very clear about the arrangements." The station master took his hat off. That was when she felt the first cold twist of fear in her belly, because no man in a summer this brutal took his hat off unless something had already gone wrong. "Miss Hayes," he said, "Edwin Pike rode out of this town yesterday evening, told the boys at the livery he was headed for the Silver Country up past Elko. He left a letter with Sheriff Burroughs for a woman coming in on the Tuesday train." Eleanor did not answer. Rose made a small sound against her collar. Not a cry, yet just the warning note that came before one. "Did he," Eleanor said finally, "leave any explanation?" "Sheriff's got the letter." "Where is the sheriff?" "Sitting in his office, ma'am, same as always." She nodded once. She made herself nod again. She could feel the sweat gathering at the small of her back, and the hot weight of the baby soaking through the shoulder of her traveling dress. And she could feel the station master's pity, which was worse than any of it. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me plain. Ma'am, you want me to carry that trunk somewhere?" "I'd like a moment." "Yes, ma'am." He put his hat back on and walked away slow, the way men walked when they wanted a woman to understand that she was being given privacy, which meant that she was being watched. Eleanor did not sit down. If she sat down, she knew she would not stand up again. She turned her back to the shack and the street, and faced the empty rails, and she pressed her lips together hard enough to taste blood. And then she pressed both hands over her mouth, and she screamed into her palms once, short and sharp, so that the baby would not hear a thing. Rose began to cry anyway, not the warning cry, the real one. The one that meant she was hot and hungry, and tired of being held, and had no patience left for her mother's composure. "Hush now," Eleanor whispered. "Hush, my girl. Hush, Rose. Mama's here. Mama's here." Rose did not hush. Eleanor shifted the baby to the other arm and tried to bounce her the way she'd bounced her through 3 weeks of train cars and 2 nights of strange boarding houses. But her arms were shaking, and the bounce came out wrong. Rose's cry climbed a register. A woman across the street stopped walking to stare. A man coming out of the mercantile turned his head. "Please." Eleanor whispered into the baby's hair. "Please, Rose, not now. Not here. Please, my love, please." A voice spoke from behind her. "Ma'am, that baby needs shade before pride kills the both of you." Eleanor turned so fast she nearly dropped her trunk. The man standing at the edge of the platform was tall, sun-dark, and perfectly still. He had the kind of stillness that came from being near horses a long time. His hat was pulled low enough that she could only see the lower half of his face, and the lower half of his face was not smiling. "I beg your pardon," Eleanor said. I said that baby needs shade. I am managing, sir. No, ma'am, you are not. Rose screamed louder. Eleanor felt her own tears rising and shoved them back down with the last of her strength. I do not require assistance, she said. I appreciate your concern, but I am not. Ma'am? He took one step closer, and he did it slow the way a man moved when he was trying not to spook a horse. I ain't asking to court you. I ain't asking your name. I'm asking if I can carry your child to the awning over yonder before she boils in that bonnet. Eleanor stared at him. Her arms were shaking so hard now that Rose was shaking with them. I don't know you, she said. No, ma'am? I don't. Name's Caleb Turner. My ranch is 3 hours north. I was in town for nails and flour. Sheriff knows me. Station master knows me. Preacher knows me. Ask any of them. Ask all of them. He paused. Or don't. But give me the child, ma'am. Just the child. You keep your trunk. You keep your distance. I'll stand on that side of the awning, and you stand on this side, and that baby gets out of the sun. That's all I'm asking. Eleanor could not speak. She looked down at her daughter's red, wet, furious face, and she looked at the stranger's outstretched hands, and she thought quite clearly, I have come 1,500 miles to place my child into the arms of a man I have never met. The terrible part was that she had already done that once. She had done it through letters, and the man in the letters had ridden west. Ma'am, Caleb said quietly, the sun ain't waiting on us. Eleanor closed her eyes. She walked 3 steps forward, and she held Rose out, and Caleb took the baby with both hands, the way a man took a thing he was afraid of breaking. His arms were steadier than hers. Rose, who had been screaming without pause for a full minute, drew in a startled breath and stopped. Well, there now, Caleb murmured low, almost to himself. Well, there now, little miss. That ain't so bad. Rose hiccuped. Eleanor made a sound she did not recognize coming out of her own throat. This way, ma'am. Caleb was already walking toward the awning on the east side of the station. Slow, deliberate, the baby cradled high on his shoulder in the shade of his own body. Watch your step there. Boards are warped. Eleanor picked up her trunk. It weighed more than she remembered. She dragged it 3 feet, stopped, and dragged it 3 feet more. She did not ask him to carry it. She did not trust herself to ask anyone for anything. Under the awning, the air was a full 10 degrees cooler. Sit down, ma'am. I would prefer to stand. Ma'am, with respect, sit. She sat. The bench was splintered under her thighs. Caleb crouched in front of her on one knee, still holding Rose, and he did it in such a way that he was lower than Eleanor was, which she understood with a sudden clarity was deliberate. He did not want to loom over her. He was not a man who had to. Ma'am, he said, what's the child's name? Rose. Rose. He looked at the baby. Rose, you got a good set of lungs on you. You gonna be a preacher's wife someday, scare the devil right out of a pew. Rose, who had been whimpering, stared up at him with enormous wet eyes and blew a bubble of spit. Ma'am, Caleb said without looking up. You got a canteen in that trunk? No, I had one. It's empty. All right. He reached one hand to his belt, pulled loose a leather canteen, uncapped it with his teeth, and held it out to her without ever looking away from the baby. You drink first, then we'll find something cooler for her. I'm not. Ma'am, you drink first, or I carry you both to the doctor and the town talks about it for a month. Your choice. Eleanor drank. The water was warm and metallic, and she had not realized how close she was to collapsing until the first swallow hit her stomach. She drank again. She drank a 3rd time. She put the canteen down on the bench, and she wiped her mouth on the back of her wrist, and she discovered that her hand was still shaking. There you go, Caleb said quietly. There you go, ma'am. My name is Eleanor Hayes. Pleased to meet you, Miss Hayes. Mrs. He did not flinch. He did not ask. He only nodded slow the way he had nodded at the baby. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Hayes. Eleanor's throat closed. She had not called herself Mrs. in 8 months. She had practiced it in her head the entire train ride like a hymn, like a spell. Mrs. Pike. Mrs. Edwin Pike. She had written it out 32 times in the margin of her Bible. She had said it aloud to her reflection in the cracked mirror of a Chicago boarding house. And now, sitting under an awning in a town whose name she could not have pointed to on a map a month ago, she had given the name Hayes to a stranger and added a lie to it without deciding to. "Mrs. Hayes," Caleb said, still watching the baby. "The man that was supposed to meet you, was he kin or was he a groom?" "A groom." "I see. He left yesterday." "Yes, ma'am. I heard." "You heard already." "Ma'am, this is a town of 200 people. A man rides out the night before his bride comes in. The news gets to the ranches before the bride does." Eleanor felt the heat rise up the back of her neck, and for the first time in her life, she could not tell if it was shame or rage. "Then you came to the station?" "I came to the station." "To look at me?" "No, ma'am." He raised his eyes for the first time, and his eyes were a quiet level gray that did not look away. "I came to the station because my sister told me there was a woman coming in on that train who didn't know her man was gone. I came to make sure somebody stood between her and the sheriff's letter who wasn't going to enjoy delivering it." Eleanor opened her mouth. She shut it. Rose in Caleb's arm had fallen asleep. "Mr. Turner," Eleanor said. "Caleb's fine." "Mr. Turner, I do not know you. I do not know your sister. I have nothing to offer you in return for any kindness. I do not even know if I have enough in my purse to pay for a room tonight, and I am not a woman who will pretend otherwise. So I will ask you plain, what do you want?" He did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Hayes, my mother took in a girl once who'd been left the same way you've been left. Not the same town, not the same man, but the same son, and the same train, and the same walk back to an empty street. That girl lived in our kitchen for 11 years. She taught me to read. She buried my mother when the fever came through. She is the reason I know how to hold a baby without dropping her." Eleanor could not breathe. "So what do I want, ma'am?" Caleb shifted Rose higher on his shoulder. "I want you out of this, son. I want that baby fed. I want the sheriff to read you his letter in a room with a door on it, not on a public platform. After that, ma'am, you tell me what you want, and if I can do it, I'll do it, and if I can't, I'll find you somebody who can. That's what I want." Eleanor put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She had not cried once in 8 months, and she was not going to start now in front of a stranger with her daughter asleep on his shoulder. But she pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars, and she breathed in and she breathed out, and when she took her hands down, she said very quietly, "All right. All right, ma'am. All right, Mr. Turner. Caleb. All right, Caleb." He stood up then slow so as not to wake the baby. "Sheriff's office is 2 doors down," he said. "On in the whole way. I'll walk on the sun side. You walk in the shade. Nobody's going to talk about a man carrying a baby while her mother walks beside him. Or if they do, they'll talk to me about it and I'll answer 'em. They'll talk anyway. Yes, ma'am, they will. You know that, and you're doing it anyway." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Caleb looked down at the child sleeping on his shoulder. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped to something close to a whisper. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I ain't never been able to watch a baby cry in a public place and sleep at night after. That's the whole of it. That's all I got to tell you." Eleanor stood up, her knees held, barely. "Mr. Turner." "Caleb, ma'am." "Caleb." She steadied her voice. "If I walk with you to the sheriff's office and he reads me that letter, and there is nothing in it, no money, no apology, no direction, I have nowhere to sleep tonight. I need you to understand that before we take another step. I am not a woman with options. I am a woman with a trunk and a child and $7.40. I cannot pay for a room. I cannot pay for a meal. I cannot pay for your trouble. If you walk me down that street, you are walking a beggar down that street, and every person who sees us will know it before sundown." Caleb listened. When she was done, he said, "Ma'am, you got a child on your shoulder and a trunk at your feet. You ain't a beggar. You're a mother who got robbed. There's a difference, and anyone in this town that don't see it ain't worth the breath to correct." That isn't how towns work. No, ma'am, it ain't. But it's how I work. And right now, I'm the one standing here. Eleanor looked at him, She looked at her daughter asleep on his shoulder, the dark hair curling damp against his collar, the small fist wrapped around the edge of his vest. She thought about the 23 letters folded in the bottom of her trunk. She thought about the wedding dress beneath them. She thought about the way her father had turned his back the morning she left Philadelphia, and the way her mother had pressed $5 into her hand in the hall and whispered, "Do not come back here, Eleanor. Not ever. You understand me. Not ever." She thought about how she had promised Rose on the train between St. Louis and Kansas City, with the baby asleep on her chest and the fields rolling by in the dark, that she would never ever put her down in a place where she was not wanted. And she looked at Caleb Turner, and she said, "All right, take me to the sheriff." "Yes, ma'am." "And Caleb." "Ma'am." "Thank you." He touched the brim of his hat with the hand that was not holding her child, and he did not smile because he was not that kind of man, but something moved behind his eyes that Eleanor would remember for the rest of her life. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "you don't thank a man for standing under an awning, you just walk." And she walked. The sheriff's office smelled like tobacco and old paper when Caleb opened the door for her. Sheriff Burroughs was a heavy man, with a soft voice, and the kind of eyes that had seen too many bad mornings to be surprised by another. He rose when Eleanor stepped in, and he did not look at the baby, which Eleanor understood was a kindness. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. "Sheriff." "Sit down, ma'am." Caleb, close that door behind you. "I'd like him to stay," Eleanor said quickly. "Figured you would." Burroughs opened a drawer. He pulled out an envelope the color of weak tea and laid it on the desk between them, and Eleanor watched the way his thumb rested on the corner of it, as if he were not yet ready to let it go. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "before I read this to you, I need to tell you something the letter does not say. Edwin Pike is not his name." Eleanor's hands went cold. "I beg your pardon. Your man you've been writing to. Man calls himself Edwin Pike. His name is Elias Parker. He has been run out of 3 territories that I know of, and he has left at least one other woman standing on a platform in exactly the manner he left you. Now, I could not prove any of that until yesterday, when a marshal come through with paper on him. That's why he ran. He didn't run from you, ma'am. He ran from the rope." Eleanor did not move. "He wrote me 23 letters, she said. "Yes, ma'am. He sent me $40 for the train. He sent the other woman 60. Caleb, standing against the wall with Rose asleep on his shoulder, said nothing. He did not look at Eleanor. He was giving her the room. "Read me the letter," Eleanor said. "Mrs. Hayes, read it." Burroughs opened the envelope. The paper inside was half a page long. Eleanor watched the sheriff's mouth as he read, and she heard the words without hearing them, because her mind had already gone ahead of the letter and was running through every line Edwin had ever written her, looking for the seam, the place where the lie had started. "Tell her," Burroughs read, "that I am sorry. Tell her the money in the tin under the stove at the boarding house is hers. Tell her I wish her better than me. Signed E. Pike." "That's it?" "That's it, ma'am." "How much money?" "I already sent a boy to look. He come back with $11. $11? "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor laughed. It was a short, flat sound, and it surprised all 3 of them, including her. She clapped her own hand over her mouth the way a woman claps a hand over a wound. "I am sorry," she said. "Ain't a thing to be sorry for." "I have $7.40, she said into her palm. "And now I have $18.40. And a child. And a trunk." "Ma'am, do not tell me it will be all right, Sheriff. I have heard grown men tell me that twice in my life, and both of them were liars." Burroughs closed his mouth. Caleb behind her shifted Rose to his other shoulder and said very quietly, "Sheriff, I'd like a word in the hall." "Caleb, I don't think—" "A word." The 2 men stepped out. The door did not quite close. Eleanor sat with her hands folded in her lap and listened to her own breathing, and she thought, "I will not cry in a sheriff's office. I will not give this town that story." She heard Burroughs say low, "You sure about this, son?" She heard Caleb say lower, "Lydia's already airing out the back room." "Caleb, you put that woman on your wagon and every tongue in Dry Creek is gonna let 'em." "Son." "Sheriff, I said let 'em." There was a silence. Then Burroughs said, "Your mother would be proud of you, and your father would whip you bloody, and I reckon that's about the size of most decisions worth making." The door opened again. Caleb came back in with Rose still asleep against his collar and said, "Mrs. Hayes, my sister is expecting us for supper. We got 3 hours of road and the sun's already past its height. I'd like to start." Eleanor looked up at him. "You have not asked me anything," she said. "No, ma'am. You have not asked why a woman my age is traveling alone with a child to marry a stranger. You have not asked why I have no family writing letters to find me. You have not asked what is in my trunk, or what I did before I got on that train, or whether the child's father is living or dead. No, ma'am, I have not." "Why not?" "Because none of it is any of my business, ma'am. And the parts that are, you'll tell me when you tell me. Or you won't. Either way, I ain't losing sleep on it." Eleanor stood. Her knees this time did not quite hold, and she reached for the edge of the desk and held it until the room stopped tilting. Caleb did not reach for her. He let her steady herself. She was grateful for that in a way she could not have explained. "Take me to your sister, Mr. Turner." "Yes, ma'am." "And stop calling me ma'am. It is making me feel 80 years old, and I do not have the strength for it today." For the first time since she had met him, the corner of Caleb Turner's mouth moved. Not a smile, just a crack in the stone. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes." She nearly laughed again. The wagon was waiting at the hitching post outside, and the moment Eleanor stepped into the street, she understood what Caleb had meant about tongues. 3 women were standing on the porch of the Mercantile across the way, and all 3 of them were watching her, and not one of them looked away when she met their eyes. The woman in the middle was tall in a blue dress too fine for a weekday with iron hair pinned tight enough to hurt. "That's Beatrice Holloway," Caleb said under his breath as he handed Eleanor up to the seat. "Banker's wife. You do not need to know her, but she is going to know you by nightfall." "She already does," Eleanor said. "Yes, ma'am." "Eleanor." "Yes, Eleanor." He climbed up beside her with Rose still on his shoulder, and then without ceremony, he handed the baby back into her mother's arms. Rose whimpered at the change, and then settled. Caleb picked up the reins. "Mrs. Holloway," he called across the street. "Afternoon." "Caleb Turner," the woman called back in a voice pitched to carry. "You have got a passenger." "I have." "And her name, Mr. Turner?" "You'll hear it, ma'am, when she's ready to give it." The wagon pulled away before Beatrice Holloway could answer, but Eleanor did not have to turn her head to know the woman was still watching. She could feel it on the back of her neck like sunburn. "She is going to tell that story," Eleanor said quietly, "before we are out of town." "She already is." "And what will she say?" "That I put a strange woman on my wagon without asking her name." "Caleb." "Eleanor, turn the wagon around." He pulled up on the reins. The horses stopped. "Ma'am, turn it around. Take me back to the Mercantile. I will not ride 3 hours to your home with that woman's version of me arriving first. If she is going to tell a story about me, she is going to tell the one I give her." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned the wagon around. Beatrice Holloway was still on the porch when they pulled up. Her 2 companions had thickened into 4. Eleanor handed Rose to Caleb without a word, and stepped down from the wagon by herself, and she walked across the dust of Main Street in a dress that had 3 weeks of travel baked into the hem, and she stopped at the foot of the Mercantile steps, and she looked up. "Mrs. Holloway?" "Yes. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I came west on the promise of a marriage to a man who has turned out to be a criminal and who has ridden out of this town ahead of a marshal's warrant. I did not know that when I boarded the train. I know it now. I am a widow with a daughter. I have $18 to my name. Mr. Turner's sister has offered me shelter until I decide what I am doing next, and I have accepted. That is the story. You may tell it in any order you like, but please tell it accurately, because I do not have the strength today to correct it twice." The silence on the porch was absolute. Beatrice Holloway's mouth opened and closed. Good afternoon, Mrs. Holloway. Eleanor turned and walked back to the wagon. She climbed up without assistance. She took Rose back from Caleb. She folded her hands in her lap. Drive on, Mr. Turner. Caleb drove on. For about a mile, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb said, Mrs. Hayes. Eleanor, I have been on this earth 33 years, and I have never in my life seen a woman do what you just did. I am not a widow. No, ma'am, I didn't figure you were. And I am not certain I was a wife. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. I heard that too, he said gently. Then you know. I know some. The man who fathered Rose. Eleanor's voice caught. She pressed her lips together and started again. The man who fathered Rose was my employer's son. I was a governess. He was engaged to a woman in Boston. When I told him about the child he told his father, I had invented the story to advance myself. I was dismissed without a reference. My own father told me I had brought shame on his house. My mother gave me $5 in the hallway and told me not to come back. Eleanor, I am not finished. Edwin Pike answered an advertisement I placed in a Chicago paper. He wrote me kind letters. He told me he did not care about my past. He said a child needed a father and a woman needed a roof, and that was all the Lord required of a marriage. I believed him. I lied to him about Rose's age by 2 months so he would not do the arithmetic, and I lied to this town just now about being a widow, and I am going to go on lying, Caleb, because my daughter cannot afford the truth, and I need you to know that before you take me another foot down this road. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Eleanor, did you lie to me about your name? No. Did you lie to me about the child being yours? No. Then we're square. Caleb. Ma'am, you can lie to the whole of Dry Creek if it keeps that baby fed. I will not correct you in public, and I will not bring it up in private. That is my word on it. Eleanor looked down at her daughter's face. Rose was awake now, blinking at the sky with the slow, unfocused wonder of an infant who had not yet decided whether to be hungry again. Why? Eleanor whispered. I told you why. At the station. Tell me again. Caleb did not answer for a while. The wagon rolled on through the heat. The horse's hooves made a steady sound on the packed dirt, and somewhere off to the west, a hawk was calling, and Eleanor thought he was not going to answer at all. Then he said, her name was Martha. Whose name? The girl my mother took in, when I was 6. My daddy had just come home drunk, and told my mother to turn her out, and my mother said, Henry Turner. This girl sleeps under my roof tonight, or I sleep under somebody else's. And he sat down at the table, and he did not say one more word about it for 11 years. Martha raised me as much as my mother did. She was 17 when she come to us. Her own people had put her on a coach and told the driver to take her as far as the fare allowed. She had a baby boy. He died that first winter of the fever. She did not leave our kitchen for a month after that. My mother sat with her every night, sang to her, held her hand, didn't try to fix it, just sat. Eleanor was crying now. She had not noticed when she had started. Martha lived to be 41 years old, Caleb said. She taught me my letters. She taught my sister to bake. She nursed my mother through the fever that took her in 68. She was buried in our family plot beside my mother, and the preacher said over her grave that she was a Turner in every way but blood, and my father, who was a hard man and not given to weeping, wept. Caleb, I seen a woman standing on a platform today with a baby in her arms and nobody coming for her, and I thought about Martha, and I thought about what my mother would do. And I went. Eleanor pressed her face against the top of Rose's head, and she wept silently for a long time, and Caleb drove the wagon and did not look at her, because he was not that kind of man. When she had stopped, she said, Your sister. Does she know? Everything I know she knows. She's the one told me to go to the station. Why? Because she saw the train come in from her upstairs window, and she watched the platform empty, and she watched one woman stay. And she come downstairs and she told me, Caleb, go, now. And I went. Eleanor shook her head. I have nothing to give either of you. Eleanor. Nothing. Eleanor, You are giving us the chance to be the kind of people my mother taught us to be. That is not nothing. That is the whole of it." Eleanor could not speak. They rode for another hour in silence, and when they crested a low rise and Caleb said, "That's the ranch there," Eleanor saw a long low house and a barn and a windmill turning slow in the hot air, and a woman standing on the porch with her hand shading her eyes watching the road. "That's Lydia," Caleb said. "She is going to take one look at me." "Yes, ma'am, she is. And she is going to know. She already knows. She has known since breakfast. She set an extra plate." Lydia Turner was younger than Eleanor had expected, perhaps 28, with the same gray eyes as her brother, and a mouth that did not smile at first meeting, because it did not consider that its job. She came down off the porch as the wagon pulled in, and she did not look at Caleb at all. She looked at Eleanor. Then she looked at the baby. Then she looked at Eleanor again. "Mrs. Hayes," she said. "Miss Turner." "Widow." "No." "Didn't think so." "Caleb, get that trunk. Mrs. Hayes, the baby needs a bath before she needs anything else on this earth, and so do you, and we will do the bath and the supper, and the introductions in that order. There is a basin warming on the stove. Come inside." Eleanor did not move. "Miss Turner." "Lydia." "Lydia, I need to say something before I cross your threshold, because if I do not say it now, I will lose my courage. I have nothing. I have a trunk, a child, and $18. I cannot pay you. I cannot promise you how long I will stay. I have a past your brother already knows the shape of, and if you take me into your house, this town will make you pay for it in ways you have not yet imagined." Lydia Turner looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Hayes, my husband was killed by a horse 4 years ago. My mother was buried 18 years ago. My father went into the grave 3 years after her, with a heart that had not been right since. I have been the woman of this house since I was 24 years old, and I have not had another woman under this roof in all that time, and I have wanted one. I do not want your $18. I want you to come inside and hand me that baby, and let me put her in warm water. And I want to set a plate in front of you that you did not have to earn, and after supper, if you still feel you owe me something, we will talk about it then. But not now, not on my porch, not in this sun." Eleanor made a sound she had not known she could make. Lydia stepped forward and took Rose out of her arms as easily as a woman who had been waiting all her life for a baby to hold, and she turned and walked toward the house. "Caleb," Lydia called over her shoulder. "Stable the horses. Mrs. Hayes, come with me." Eleanor followed her. At the threshold she stopped because Rose had made a small sound of protest at being carried by a stranger, and because 11 years of her mother's voice had told her a woman like her did not belong on a porch like this one, and because something in her was afraid that if she stepped across this doorway, she would begin to hope again, and she did not know if she could survive hoping and losing a second time. Lydia Turner turned in the doorway with Rose on her shoulder, and she looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Hayes." "Yes." "Come in." Eleanor stepped across the threshold. Behind her in the yard, Caleb Turner was already lifting her trunk down off the wagon, and he was doing it with both hands the way a man carried a thing he intended to set down somewhere safe. 3 weeks on the Turner ranch, and Eleanor had almost stopped flinching at kindness. Almost. She still woke before dawn. She still set her own bed before anyone could see it unmade. She still apologized when Lydia caught her carrying a pail too heavy for her, and Lydia still said, "Mrs. Hayes, you stop that apologizing, or I swear to God I will put you on that wagon back to Dry Creek with my own hands." "Eleanor, I know your name." "Then use it." "I will when you stop thanking me for bread." Rose had grown a tooth. That was the first small miracle of the month. Caleb had been the one to find it rubbing a clean knuckle along the baby's gum while Eleanor hung laundry, and he had come into the yard holding Rose up like a found coin and said, "Eleanor, she's got a tooth. She's got a whole tooth." Caleb, "A tooth, Eleanor." "I know." "Did you know?" "I knew 3 days ago." "And you didn't tell me." "I wasn't sure she would keep it." He had laughed then, for the first time since she had met him. A real laugh, and Eleanor had stood in the yard with a wet sheet in her hands, and she had understood with a clarity that frightened her that she was in trouble, because she was going to love this man, because she already did. On the third Friday of her stay, Lydia came down the stairs in her Sunday dress at 10 in the morning and set a folded paper on the kitchen table in front of Eleanor. "What is this?" "An invitation." "To what?" "The Independence Day supper, Saturday next. Everyone in the county. Reverend Coombs is preaching a short sermon the Holloways are hosting at the Grange, and there will be pie." "Lydia." "There will be pie, Eleanor." "I am not going." "You are going." "I am not." Lydia sat down. "Eleanor, if you do not go, this town will decide you are hiding. And a woman who hides is a woman who has something to hide. And a woman who has something to hide is a woman the Beatrice Holloways of this world gnaw on until there is nothing left. You will walk in on my brother's arm, you will eat one slice of pie, you will shake 3 hands, and you will walk out. That is all. And if someone asks me, then you say what you said on the porch of the Mercantile, and you say it exactly the same way, and they will not ask you twice." Eleanor looked down at the invitation. "Lydia." "Yes." "I am afraid." "I know you are. I do not know if I can do it." Lydia reached across the table, and she took Eleanor's hand in both of her own, and she said, "Eleanor Hayes, you walked across Main Street in a travel-stained dress and told Beatrice Holloway the truth to her face with the sun on your head. There is not one woman in this county who could have done what you did that day. You can eat a piece of pie." Saturday came. Caleb wore the one good coat he owned, the one his father had been buried in, and Lydia had taken off the body before the burial, because his father had been particular about good cloth. He stood in the yard waiting for the women, and he did not look at Eleanor when she came out, because he had decided ahead of time that if he looked at her in that dress, he would say something he would regret for a month. "Caleb." "Ma'am?" "You said you were going to stop calling me that." "I said I would try harder." "Yes, Eleanor." He handed her up to the wagon with a hand that was not quite steady, and Lydia climbed up behind her with Rose on her hip, and they drove into Dry Creek for the first time since the afternoon Eleanor had stepped off the train. The Grange Hall was already crowded when they arrived. Eleanor felt the room turn. She did not imagine it. A woman near the cider table stopped mid-sentence. A boy turned to look at her and was smacked on the back of the head by his mother for staring. Reverend Coombs, a lean gray man with a voice like dry paper, came across the floor with both hands extended, and he took Eleanor's hand in his, and he said, "Mrs. Hayes, welcome. I have been hoping to meet you." "Reverend?" "You will sit at my table. Mrs. Coombs has saved a chair." "That is very kind." "It is not kindness, ma'am. It is good manners. There is a difference, and in this town we are working on remembering it." He said it loudly enough that 3 women near the cider turned around and found something else to look at. Eleanor could have kissed him. Lydia disappeared with Rose into a circle of older women who had been waiting all summer for a baby to pass around, and Caleb stayed 1 step behind Eleanor's shoulder the whole way across the floor, and Eleanor felt the eyes of the room on her back like a hand pressing down. "Caleb." "Yes." "I cannot do an hour of this." "You do not have to do an hour. You have to do the next minute. And then the minute after." They ate. The pie was good. Eleanor could not taste it. Mrs. Coombs, the Reverend's wife, was a small round woman who asked Eleanor 3 harmless questions about the ranch, and then did all the talking for both of them, which Eleanor understood was a mercy, and which she would remember for the rest of her life. Beatrice Holloway did not come to the Reverend's table. She stayed at her own table across the hall holding court. Eleanor could feel her watching. Every few minutes, a woman would lean in toward Beatrice, and Beatrice would murmur something, and the women around her would all look at once at Eleanor, and then all look away at once, and Eleanor would feel the side of her neck burn. "Caleb?" "Yes." "She is working on something. I see her. Whatever it is coming. I see that too." It came during the 3rd hymn. The Reverend had just lifted his hand for the closing prayer when a man stumbled through the back door of the Grange with a bottle in his fist. He was broad, sunburned, unsteady, and loud. "Wade Mercer." Caleb said under his breath, and his whole body went still in a way Eleanor had not seen before. He was not supposed to be here. "Evening, folks," Wade called out. "Evening, evening. Don't let me interrupt the Lord's work. I just come for the pie." A few men laughed. Most did not. "Mr. Mercer," the Reverend said mildly, "we are at prayer." "I see that, Reverend. I see that. You go on. I'll just sit here quiet as a church mouse. Quiet as a church." Wade squinted across the hall. Well now, who is that?" Eleanor did not turn her head. "Caleb Turner," Wade said louder. "Caleb, that's your woman there?" Caleb stood up. "Sit down, Wade." "I am asking a question, Caleb. And I am telling you to sit down." "A man cannot ask a question. A drunk man cannot." Wade grinned. It was not a good grin. Eleanor could see even across the room that he had come here to do exactly this, and she could see even more clearly that somebody had paid him to come. Her eyes went to Beatrice Holloway. Beatrice was not smiling. Beatrice was watching still as a hawk with her hands folded in her lap. "Caleb," Eleanor whispered. "Sit down, please." "Eleanor? Sit down." Caleb did not sit down. "Well, Caleb," Wade called, walking closer. "I'll ask her myself then." "Ma'am? Ma'am? You the Hayes widow?" Eleanor turned her face toward him. She did it slowly, and she did it with her shoulders back, and she said loud enough to carry, "I am Eleanor Hayes, yes." "Widow?" "Yes. Funny thing about that." "Is it?" "Mighty funny thing." Wade was grinning wider now. He was 10 feet from the Reverend's table. "See, I got a cousin in St. Joseph, works for the railroad, and my cousin wrote me a letter last week on account of I had sent him a letter asking after a particular thing. And my cousin, he told me the most peculiar piece of news." The hall had gone silent. "Mr. Mercer," the Reverend said, "I will thank you too. He told me," Wade went on, "that there is no record in the state of Pennsylvania of any Eleanor Hayes ever being married to any man living or dead. He told me that the Hayes family of Philadelphia has one daughter by that name unmarried as of last Christmas, and that the family has told callers the daughter is in the mountains taking the air." The silence was so complete, Eleanor could hear her own pulse. "Taking the air," Wade said, "with a baby." He laughed. A woman near the back of the hall gasped and then clapped her hand over her own mouth, as if the sound had been stolen from her. A chair scraped. Someone murmured, "Oh, dear Lord." Eleanor sat very still. She had known this would come. She had known it in the sheriff's office. She had known it on the porch of the Mercantile. She had known it every night of the last 3 weeks while she rocked Rose to sleep in a back bedroom she had not paid for. She had known, and she had hoped anyway. And now the hope was crashing down around her in front of 60 people. And she could not make her hands unfold in her lap. "Caleb Turner," Wade called, turning to face the room now playing to it. "You've been housing a—" "Wade." Caleb said it quietly. The hall went quieter still. "Wade Mercer." "What?" "You finish that sentence and I will put you on the floor, right here, in front of the Reverend, in front of the pie. I will put you on the floor and I will not apologize to your mother." "Caleb?" "I said finish the sentence." Wade did not finish the sentence, but Beatrice Holloway stood up. She stood up slowly, in the way of a woman who had been waiting to stand up for 3 weeks, and she did not raise her voice because she did not have to. "Mr. Turner, Mrs. Holloway, this is not a matter of Mr. Mercer's manners. This is a matter of public truth. You have a woman under your roof. A woman your sister introduced to this town as a widow, a woman you have escorted tonight to a Christian gathering, and it now appears that this woman has lied about the single most important fact of her character. I think we are owed an explanation. I think the Reverend is owed an explanation. I think the Lord is owed." "The Lord," said the Reverend in a voice that was suddenly not mild at all, "has heard enough from you today, Mrs. Holloway. Sit down." "Reverend?" "Sit down." Beatrice did not sit down. Eleanor stood up. She did it without deciding to. She felt her own legs straighten under her, felt the grange floor hard beneath her shoes, felt Caleb's hand come halfway up to stop her and then fall back because he understood in that second that this was hers and not his. "Mrs. Holloway," Eleanor said. Miss Hayes." "Miss is correct." A sound went through the hall. "Miss is correct," Eleanor said again. "I was never married. I have never been married. The child you have seen in my arms for the last 3 weeks is my daughter, and she was born out of wedlock, and I lied to this town about it the first day I arrived because I had a baby in my arms and $18 in my pocket, and I did not believe any of you would let me live if I told you the truth. I was right. I see looking around this room that I was right." Nobody moved. "Her father," Eleanor said, and her voice did not break, though she could feel it trying, "was the son of the household that employed me. He was engaged to another woman. When I told him I was carrying his child, he denied me to my face and to his father's face, and I was turned out of the house without a reference and without my wages. I went home to my parents. My father refused to speak to me. My mother gave me $5 in the hall and told me not to come back. I answered an advertisement in a Chicago paper because I had no other option, and the man who answered me turned out to be a criminal who ran from a marshal's warrant the day before my train arrived. I stood on the platform at Dry Creek Station with a baby in my arms, and I thought I was going to die in the sun. Mr. Turner came for me. His sister came for me. The Reverend and his wife came for me tonight. I do not know any of you well enough to ask for your mercy. I am not asking for it. I am telling you what is true, because Mr. Mercer has opened the door, and I will not stand in a room full of people and let him close it on a lie." She turned her head slowly, and she looked at Beatrice Holloway. "You have wanted this for 3 weeks, Mrs. Holloway. I hope it gives you peace." Beatrice Holloway's mouth was white. She did not answer. Caleb was the one who spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He simply stood where he was beside Eleanor, and he said loud enough for the whole hall to hear, "I knew." Eleanor turned. "Caleb." "Eleanor, I knew. I have known since the afternoon in the wagon. You told me. I told you I'd keep it. I have kept it." He looked out at the room. "So anyone in this hall who wants to punish her tonight is going to punish me first, because I am the one who carried her trunk to my sister's house, and I am the one who set the plate, and I am the one who is standing here now, and I am telling you, I am telling all of you, that the only thing Miss Hayes has done wrong in this county is expect less from us than the Lord did." Nobody moved. Then the Reverend stood up. "Caleb Turner," he said, "sit down. Miss Hayes, sit down. Mrs. Holloway, I am not going to tell you again. Mr. Mercer, you will leave this hall, tonight, on your own feet or on the sheriff's arm, and I do not care which." He raised his hand. "We have one hymn left in the program, and we are going to sing it, and then we are going to eat the rest of the pie, and anyone in this room who cannot manage that is welcome to leave with Mr. Mercer." Wade Mercer left. Beatrice Holloway left with her chin high and her hand at her throat, and 3 women followed her, and 4 women did not. The Reverend opened his hymnal. They sang. Eleanor did not hear a word of it. She sang anyway. She held the bench in front of her with both hands, and she moved her mouth, and she did not look at Caleb because she could not, because if she looked at him, she would fall down. When the hymn was over, Lydia appeared at her elbow with Rose on her shoulder, and Lydia did not say a word. She simply put Rose into Eleanor's arms, and she pressed her hand against the small of Eleanor's back, and she walked her out of the Grange Hall on the arm of her brother, like a woman walking a bride down an aisle. They did not speak on the ride home. Rose slept. Lydia held the reins. Caleb sat in the wagon bed because he had given Eleanor his seat, and Eleanor could feel him behind her in the dark, 3 feet away, quiet as prayer. At the ranch, Lydia took Rose without asking. Lydia said, "I'll put her down. You 2 walk." Lydia. Eleanor, walk. Caleb walked her out to the fence behind the barn, and he did not touch her. He stood 2 feet away with his hands on the top rail, and he looked out at the dark pasture, and he said, "Eleanor, I have to say a thing." Caleb. Let me say it. Yes, I knew, he said. I knew that afternoon in the wagon. I have known every day since. I did not keep quiet because I was protecting you. I kept quiet because there was nothing in what you told me that needed protecting from. I am saying it again tonight because I want you to hear it in the dark with nobody watching. You are not ruined. You are not fallen. You are not a secret. You are a woman who has carried a child through a country that did not want her to, and you have done it with more grace than this whole county deserves to witness. Caleb, I am not finished. I am asking you now because I should have asked you 2 weeks ago, and I was a coward. I am asking you to consider when you are ready, and not a minute before, whether you might let me court you. Properly. In the daylight. In front of the Reverend and my sister, and your daughter, and God and Beatrice Holloway, and the whole of Dry Creek. I am not asking for an answer tonight. I am not asking for an answer next week. I am telling you the question is on the table, and it is going to stay on the table for as long as you need it to. Eleanor turned her face up to him. Caleb Turner. Eleanor, you are a fool. Yes, ma'am. You are a fool, and I am in love with you, and I do not know which of those things frightens me more. Caleb closed his eyes. He did not reach for her. He did not kiss her. He simply stood there with his hands on the top rail of his own fence, and Eleanor watched a man who had not wept in front of another human being since he was 6 years old press his forehead against the wood and breathe like a man who had just been let up from the bottom of a river. Caleb. Give me a minute, Eleanor. Take the minute. He took the minute. When he lifted his head, his voice was almost steady. Eleanor Hayes. Yes. You go on inside now. My sister is waiting. I will be along in a while. I have got to thank a God I ain't spoken to in some time, and I'd rather do it out here. Eleanor went inside. Lydia was sitting by the fire with Rose asleep across her lap, and when Eleanor came through the door, Lydia looked up, and she did not ask a single question, because she did not have to. Eleanor? Lydia. He asked you. Yes? And Eleanor sat down on the floor beside her the way a daughter sits beside her mother, and she put her head against Lydia Turner's knee, and she said, "And I told him I loved him." Lydia Turner set her hand on the crown of Eleanor's head. "Girl," she whispered. "Oh, girl, welcome home." Morning came too soon. Eleanor woke before the sun, as she always did, and for the first quiet minute of the day, she did not remember. Then she remembered, and she sat up in the small back bedroom, and she pressed both hands flat against her sternum, and she whispered, "Oh, Lord." I said it out loud. Rose stirred in the basket beside the bed. "I know, baby, I know. Mama said a thing last night she cannot take back." By the time she came into the kitchen, Lydia was already at the stove. "Lydia, coffee's ready. Lydia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Always do. Did I dream last night?" Lydia did not turn around. "No, Eleanor, you did not." "He asked me to let him court me." "He did." "And I told him—" "I heard what you told him. I was sitting 10 feet away with your sleeping child on my chest, and the window open. Eleanor, and the good Lord gave me the ears he gave me." Eleanor sat down. "Lydia, drink your coffee." "Lydia, I have to go." Lydia turned around. She set the skillet down slowly, and she wiped her hands on her apron, and she said, "Eleanor Hayes, say that to me again. I have to go. I have to leave. I stood up in that Grange Hall last night, and I told 60 people what I am. There is not a woman in this town who will speak to your brother on the street now. There is not a contract he will be offered. There is not a bank that will hold his note. I have put a bullet in his life, Lydia, and the only way to pull it out is to leave." Lydia did not raise her voice. She said, "Is that what you want?" "It is not about what I want. Eleanor, I asked you a question. Is it what you want?" "No." "Then you will sit in that chair, and you will drink that coffee, and you will not speak another word about leaving this house until my brother has had his breakfast. Because if he comes down those stairs and you tell him what you just told me, Eleanor, it will put him in the ground. Do you hear me?" "Lydia, do you hear me?" "I hear you. Caleb came down 10 minutes later. He did not look at Eleanor the way a man looks at a woman he has spoken love to in the dark. He looked at her the way a man looks at a woman he has spoken love to in the dark, and is terrified she has changed her mind by morning. Eleanor. Caleb. You are still here. I am still here. All right then. He sat down and he ate his eggs, and he did not say another word for 7 minutes, and Eleanor watched the careful way his hand held the fork, and she understood that she had, in the space of one night, become the most frightening person in this man's life. Caleb. Yes. I almost left this morning. He set the fork down. I figured. Lydia talked me out of it. I figured that too. Caleb, I am going to ruin you. Eleanor. I am. There is no version of this where I am not. I saw Beatrice Holloway's face last night. I saw the 4 women who stayed, and the 3 women who left, and the 3 women who left have husbands with ledgers, and the ledgers will come for you. And I am going to watch a man I love lose his ranch because he took in a governess with a baby. I cannot watch that, Caleb. I cannot. I would rather walk out of here with Rose on my hip than watch that. Are you finished? Yes. Then I am going to tell you 3 things, Eleanor, and then I am going to go fix the south fence, and you are going to think about them while I am gone. Caleb. 3 things. 1. I have carried this ranch on my own for 6 years, and I have carried it debt-free for 4, and there is no ledger in this county that has a line on me. 2. Beatrice Holloway does not run this town. She only thinks she does. And 3. He stood up. 3. Eleanor, you do not get to decide for me what I am willing to lose. That is my decision. That was always my decision. And I made it the afternoon I set your trunk down inside that door. He put his hat on. I will be back by supper. He walked out. Eleanor sat at the table with her cooling coffee and her folded hands, and Lydia from the stove said without turning around, "There is a man who has been waiting 6 years to make a speech like that." Eleanor laughed. She did not mean to. It came out half a sob. Lydia. Yes. How is it that you are not married? Because the only man I ever loved got killed by a horse at 24, Eleanor, and because I have been waiting for my brother to bring home a woman worth handing this house to so that I could go west and start over. You are the first one he has ever brought home. I was beginning to think he never would. Eleanor stared at her. Lydia. Don't. You said you wanted. I said don't. Not this morning. This morning you drink your coffee and you hold that baby and you let a man fix a fence. The rest we will talk about in 6 months. By Wednesday the town had split. Reverend Coombs came out to the ranch on Tuesday afternoon with a basket from his wife, a jar of peach preserves, and a list of 9 families who had sent word that Miss Hayes was welcome at their tables. He read the list aloud in the yard slowly, and he did not comment on any of the names, and Eleanor understood that he was giving her a map of the town the way a man gives another man directions through bad country. Reverend? Miss Hayes. I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to thank me, ma'am. I made a promise at that pulpit 31 years ago to do the right thing. I have not always kept it. I kept it Saturday night. That was between me and the Lord, not between you and me. 3 other names were on a separate list folded that he handed to Caleb without comment. Caleb read them. He said, Holloway, Mercer, Dawson. Yes. The bank, the saloon, and the cattle broker. Yes. Reverend, you are telling me a thing. I am telling you a thing, Caleb. That they are moving. They are moving. Caleb folded the paper. All right. Caleb, I have known you since you were a boy in short pants. I am telling you this as your minister and as the man who buried your mother. Be careful. Yes, sir. I have said my piece. He left. By Thursday, the first blow came. A hand named Willis, who had worked the Turner Ranch for 2 years and was reliable as daylight, came into the yard and stood with his hat in his hands and could not meet Caleb's eyes. Boss? Willis. Boss, I cannot stay. Who got to you? Mr. Dawson said my sister would lose her place at the laundry if I did not come off this ranch. She has 3 children, boss. I cannot eat. Willis, look at me. Willis looked at him. Go home to your sister. Keep your job. I do not hold it against you. Tell Mr. Dawson you did exactly as he asked. I will not make it harder on you. You are a good hand, and this is not your fight. Boss, I am sorry. You got nothing to be sorry for. Willis rode out. Eleanor, watching from the porch, came down off the steps. Caleb, it is one hand. It is the beginning. It is one hand, Eleanor. Caleb, Eleanor, I have had lean summers before. I have run this ranch with 2 hands and I have run it with 6. I can run it with 3. And if Dawson gets to the other 3, then I run it with me and Lydia and the dog. We are not discussing this, Eleanor. Go inside. Caleb Turner. Please. That was the word that stopped her. He did not say please. Not to her, not in the 3 weeks and 4 days she had known him. He said, yes, ma'am, and all right, and Eleanor, and it is fine. He had not said please to any living person in her hearing. She went inside. On Friday morning, a second letter came. It came by a rider, not the mail coach, and the rider would not come down off the horse. He handed the letter to Lydia and said, For Miss Hayes, from the Territory Marshal's office. They said to wait for her mark. Lydia carried it into the kitchen. Eleanor, what is it? I do not know. It is sealed. It is Marshal's paper. Eleanor sat down. She broke the seal. The letter was short. 2 paragraphs. It was not from the Marshal directly, but from a clerk in his office writing on official stationery, and Eleanor read it twice before she understood it, and then she set it flat on the table and she stared at it for a full minute. Eleanor. Lydia, sit down. Is he dead? He is dead. Lydia sat down. Elias Parker, Eleanor said, and her voice was very level. The man who called himself Edwin Pike. He was shot in a silver camp outside Elko 11 days ago, in a dispute over cards. The Marshal's office is writing to inform me because my name was found on a document in his possession. What document? A deed. Lydia did not speak. A deed, Lydia. He left me a deed. He must have signed it before he wrote the letter to the sheriff. He must have... Eleanor pressed her palm flat to her forehead. He left me a house and 4 acres outside Dry Creek on the West Road. It was in his name. It is in mine now. The clerk says there is no dispute. Nobody else is on the paper. It is a small property. It has... She read the letter again. It has a well, a barn, and what the clerk calls a sound roof, though he has not seen it personally. Lydia was staring at her. Eleanor? Yes? You own a house. I own a house. Eleanor? Do you understand what that means? I understand exactly what that means. Lydia stood up. You do not need us. Lydia. You do not need us, Eleanor. Not for a roof, not for a floor, not for a door that locks. You can walk into that house with that baby on your hip, and you can be a landowner, and there is not a Beatrice Holloway in this county who can take it from you. Lydia, you are free, Eleanor. Eleanor looked down at the paper. The rider in the yard called, Ma'am, your mark. Eleanor went to the door with the pen, and she signed her name, Eleanor Hayes, and the rider tipped his hat and rode off. And Eleanor came back inside and sat down at the kitchen table, and she held the letter in both hands like a thing she had found in a field, and could not yet decide whether to keep. Lydia. Yes. When Caleb comes in tonight. Yes. I am going to tell him. Yes. And then I am going to tell him something else. Yes. Lydia sat down across from her. Tell me now, Eleanor. I am going to tell him I am moving into that house. Lydia closed her eyes. Eleanor, listen to me, please. I am going to move into that house, Lydia, because if I do not, I will live the rest of my life wondering whether I stayed with your brother because I loved him or because I had nowhere else to go. I cannot live that life. He cannot live it either. He deserves a woman who chooses him with both hands full, not a woman who chooses him because her hands are empty. Lydia opened her eyes. She did not argue. She said, "Eleanor Hayes, that is the most terrifying thing you have ever said in my kitchen, and it is the most right." Caleb came in at sundown, covered in dust with a cut on the back of his hand from a nail. Caleb, "Eleanor, sit down. Let me wash first." "Wash and then sit down." He washed. He sat down. Eleanor slid the letter across the table. He read it. He read it a second time. He set it down very carefully in the middle of the table, flat, as a man sets down a thing that might catch fire. And he folded his hands in his lap, and he looked at her, and he said, "All right, Eleanor, tell me." "I am moving into that house." Caleb did not move. "When?" "Monday. Lydia will ride with me the first night. After that, it is only me and Rose. The place is 2 miles off the west road, a mile from the nearest neighbor, and the clerk's letter says the well is sound." "All right." Caleb. "I said all right, Eleanor. Look at me." He looked at her. "Caleb, I am not leaving you." "Eleanor, I am not leaving you. I am moving 2 miles down the road into a house with my name on the paper, so that when you come to that door on Sunday afternoons, Caleb Turner, you are coming to court a woman who is choosing you. Not a woman you took in, not a woman who has no other place to put her child. A woman standing on her own porch with her own roof over her head, who has looked at every door in this country and picked yours." Caleb stared at her. "Eleanor, I am not finished. Look at me." "I am looking. If I move into your house now, Caleb, if I marry you next week, because the whole town has seen me in your kitchen, and there is nothing else to be done about it, then for the rest of my life. Every time there is a hard word between us, I will wonder whether you married me because you wanted to, or because you had to. And every time there is a hard word between us, you will wonder whether I stayed because I loved you, or because I had nowhere else to stand. And I will not live that life, Caleb. I will not do that to you. I will not do it to Rose. I will not do it to myself." Caleb's jaw moved. He did not speak. Eleanor said softer, "Ask me in 6 weeks." "Eleanor, ask me in 6 weeks, Caleb Turner, when I have been in my own house long enough to have my own account with the grocer. When the town has seen me on my own porch. When Beatrice Holloway has had to walk past a widow's house." She stopped, and she corrected herself. "Past a single woman's house, on her way to church, and has had to decide what to call me. Ask me then. Ask me properly. Ask me when I have nothing to lose by saying no, and I will give you my answer. Caleb, and you will know, and so will I." Caleb sat for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Lydia, go upstairs." Caleb, "Lydia, please." Lydia picked up Rose and went upstairs. When she was gone, Caleb reached across the table, and he did it slowly, and he laid his hand flat on top of Eleanor's hand, where it rested beside the letter, and he did not take it. He just laid his hand over hers. She could feel the callus at the base of his thumb. She could feel the heat of him. "Eleanor." "Yes, you are the strongest person I have ever met." Caleb. "I am not finished. You are the strongest person I have ever met, and I have known strong women. My mother, my sister, Martha. I have known women who ran ranches, and women who buried husbands, and women who walked 500 miles with nothing but a Bible. You are stronger than any of them, Eleanor Hayes, and I am going to spend the rest of my natural life trying to deserve having sat across a table from you." Caleb. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Sunday afternoons. Sunday afternoons, and Wednesdays if you can spare them. "I can spare them." Caleb. "One more thing." "Yes. Rose is going to grow up calling you something. I do not know what. I do not want to know tonight. But I want you to know that whatever she calls you, it will be because she chose it, and I will not steer her. I will not ask her to call you father before she is ready. I will not ask her to call you anything. She is going to decide in her own time. Can you live with that?" Eleanor. "Can you live with that?" "I can live with that." Say it out loud. I can live with whatever that child calls me, Eleanor Hayes, and on the day she picks a name for me, I will be the happiest man in this territory, whatever the name turns out to be." Eleanor closed her eyes. She turned her hand over under his, and she laced her fingers through his fingers, and for the space of one breath, they sat in the yellow lamplight of Lydia Turner's kitchen, holding hands across a marshal's letter. Then Eleanor said, "Call Lydia down. I want to tell her we are engaged to be engaged. She is going to laugh at us, and I would like to hear it." Caleb called Lydia down. Lydia came with Rose on her hip, and she looked at their faces, and she looked at their hands on the table, and she said, "Well, 6 weeks, Liddy." "6 weeks what?" "6 weeks, and I am going to ask her proper. She is moving into the Pike House Monday. She is going to run her own place. I am going to court her on Sundays." Lydia looked at Eleanor. She looked at her for a long moment, and then slow, she smiled the first real smile Eleanor had ever seen cross Lydia Turner's mouth, and she said, "Eleanor Hayes, you are going to be a very good sister." Eleanor put her face in her hands. She did not know if she was laughing or crying. She knew for the first time in a very long time that it did not matter which. Monday morning, Eleanor Hayes moved into her own house. Lydia drove the wagon. Caleb rode alongside on the gelding silent jaw set, the way a man rides when he has decided not to argue with a woman he is proud of. Rose slept in a basket between Eleanor's feet. The trunk that had been dragged off a train platform 7 weeks before now sat in the wagon bed beside a sack of flour, a tin of lard, a bundle of blankets Lydia had folded the night before, without being asked, a pair of chickens in a crate, and the Turner family Bible which Lydia had put in the trunk when Eleanor was not looking. At the edge of the Pike property, Caleb reined up. "Eleanor." "Caleb." "I am going no farther. You cross that line alone." "Caleb." "No, ma'am. You said it at the kitchen table. You said you wanted to walk onto your own porch. I am not taking that from you. I will be along Sunday." Eleanor swallowed. She climbed down from the wagon. She lifted Rose out of the basket. She looked at the small weathered house with its crooked front step and its sound roof, and she thought, "I own that door. I own the handle on that door. If I walk through it, and I shut it behind me, no man alive can open it without my leave." She walked across the yard. She went up the step. She opened the door of her own house, and she carried her daughter inside, and she set her on the floor of a room that belonged for the first time in Eleanor Hayes's 24 years of living to Eleanor Hayes. She closed the door. Then she leaned her forehead against the wood, and she cried for 10 minutes without making a sound. The first week, she scrubbed. The second week, she painted the 2 rooms with a pail of whitewash Lydia had sent over with a rider. She fixed the crooked front step herself. She nearly took her thumb off with the hammer. She did not cry about it. She wrapped the thumb in a strip of muslin, and she went on working. The third Sunday, Caleb came to call. He came in the one good coat, and he brought a jar of Lydia's peach preserves, and he took his hat off at the door, and he said, "Miss Hayes." "Mr. Turner." "May I come in?" "You may." He came in. He sat on the only chair. Eleanor sat across from him on the crate she had been using for a second chair, and Rose played on the floor between them with a wooden spoon. "Miss Hayes." "Yes." "That is a good step out front." "I fixed it myself." "I can see that, ma'am." "Are you laughing at me, Caleb Turner?" "No, ma'am. I am admiring you." "Well, stop. It is making me nervous." "Me?" Caleb stayed an hour. He did not ask to stay longer. He stood up at the end of the hour, he put his hat back on, and he said, "Miss Hayes, may I come next Sunday?" "You may." "And the Sunday after?" "Yes, Caleb." 4 more Sundays. 4 more Sundays. He left. The 4th Sunday, Beatrice Holloway came to the Pike House. Eleanor saw her from the window, and for a long second she thought about not opening the door. Then she thought about the 3 weeks she had slept under Caleb Turner's roof, and she thought about the porch at the Mercantile, and she put Rose on her hip, and she opened the door herself. "Mrs. Holloway." "Miss Hayes?" "You have come a long way for a Sunday." "I have come to apologize." Eleanor did not move. "I beg your pardon." "I have come to apologize, Miss Hayes. May I sit?" Eleanor stepped aside. Beatrice Holloway sat on the crate. Eleanor sat on the chair. Rose, who had never met Beatrice Holloway and did not know she was supposed to be frightened of her, reached for the woman's iron gray hair and pulled. Beatrice did not pull the hand away. She let Rose pull. It was the first human thing Eleanor had ever seen her do. "Miss Hayes." "Mrs. Holloway." "I was wrong." Eleanor did not speak. "I was wrong," Beatrice said again, and her voice was very tight. "And my husband told me so in plain words 6 weeks ago, and I did not hear him. I heard him on Friday. He told me that if I did not come out here and say to your face what I had said behind your back, he would not sit across a breakfast table from me again. He meant it. In 31 years of marriage, he has never meant a thing more." "Mr. Holloway said that." "He did." "Mrs. Holloway, I do not know what you expect me to do with that." "I do not expect anything, Miss Hayes. I am telling you that I was wrong. I am telling you that I tried to hurt you. I am telling you that my own son was born 7 months after my wedding day, and I have spent 31 years pretending otherwise, and it turns out that a woman who has pretended about herself for 31 years gets very good at pretending about other women. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to let me walk out of this house knowing I came." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Holloway." "Yes." "Your son, is he a good man?" Beatrice Holloway's face broke. "He is the best man I know." "Then you did well, Mrs. Holloway. Whatever it cost you, you did well." Beatrice Holloway put her hand over her mouth. She stood up. "Miss Hayes, thank you." "You are welcome in this house on any Sunday, Mrs. Holloway. I do not promise to be warm. I promise to be civil. That is the best I can do today. That is more than I deserve. It is exactly what you deserve. Go home to your husband." Beatrice Holloway went home to her husband. The 5th Sunday, Caleb came again, and this time he stayed for supper because Eleanor had cooked one, and because Eleanor had said, "Mr. Turner, I have made more stew than one woman and a child can eat, and I would take it as a favor if you would help me with the excess. Miss Hayes, I would be honored." "Sit down, Caleb, and stop calling me miss like I am a school teacher." "Yes, Eleanor." The 6th Sunday, Caleb came at noon instead of 3. Eleanor saw him coming up the road, and she knew the way a woman knows, and she took off her apron, and she went to the mirror she had hung on the kitchen wall, and she fixed her hair with hands that were not quite steady, and she went out onto her own front step to wait. He came up the path with his hat in his hand. "Eleanor." "Caleb." "It has been 6 weeks." "It has. I said I would ask you proper." "You did." He went down on one knee on the porch she had fixed herself. "Eleanor Hayes." "Yes." "Will you be my wife?" Eleanor stepped forward. She put her hand flat against his cheek and she looked down at him and she said, "Caleb Turner, stand up. I am not going to say yes to you while you are on one knee. I said yes to a man on one knee once in my life and he ruined me for it. You are going to hear me say yes, standing up like equals on the porch I fixed with my own hands." Caleb stood up. "Eleanor." "Yes, Caleb. Yes, of course yes. 1,000 times yes. And the answer would have been yes on the 3rd Sunday, and you have known it, so do not pretend you have been in any suspense." "I have been in some suspense, Eleanor." "You have been in no suspense at all, Caleb Turner." "Not much." "Not any." "Not any, ma'am. That is true." They were married by Reverend Coombs at the end of August under a cottonwood tree, behind the Grange Hall, because Eleanor had said she would not be married indoors in the town that had tried to break her. And Reverend Coombs had said that was fine by him, the Lord preferred trees anyway. 41 people came. Beatrice Holloway came. She did not sit in the front row. She sat in the 3rd row with her husband, and she wept through the vows, and nobody pretended not to notice. Wade Mercer did not come. Wade Mercer had been told by Sheriff Burroughs 2 weeks earlier that the next time he set foot in Dry Creek drunk, he would be riding out of the territory on the back of a wagon with his hands tied, and Wade Mercer had elected to take his custom to a saloon 4 towns over, which nobody in Dry Creek seemed to miss. Lydia Turner stood as Eleanor's witness. She held Rose through the ceremony. When the Reverend said the words, Lydia whispered into the baby's ear, There. He is yours now too. For keeps. Rose said clear as a bell the first word of her life. She said C.A. She did not say Caleb. She said C.A. She pointed at him when she said it. Every person under the cottonwood heard her. Caleb, in the middle of his vows, stopped. Eleanor. Yes, Caleb. Your daughter said my name. Half of it, Caleb. Half is enough. Finish your vows, Caleb Turner. Yes, ma'am. He finished his vows. He kissed his wife. Rose in Lydia's arms said, "K," 3 more times, each one louder than the last, until everyone under the cottonwood was laughing, including Beatrice Holloway, including the Reverend, including Caleb, who had tears running down his face and was not bothering to wipe them. That was the end of the wedding. It was not the end of the story. Because Eleanor Hayes now. Eleanor Turner did not sell the Pike House. She had decided 3 weeks before the wedding. She had told Caleb first in her kitchen on a Wednesday over coffee. Caleb. Eleanor. I am going to keep that house. All right. I am not going to live in it. I figured. Caleb, I am going to use it. For what, Eleanor? She had looked at him across the table for a long moment. For the next one. The next what? The next woman, Caleb. The next woman who steps off that train with a baby in her arms and nobody coming for her. The next woman whose man rode west the day before. The next woman who has $18 in her purse and a trunk full of a life she cannot go back to. I am going to put her in that house, Caleb. I am going to put her in the bed I made up myself. I am going to feed her at the table I scrubbed. I am going to keep her there until she can stand on her own 2 feet in this country, and I am going to ask her for not 1 cent. That is what I am going to do with that house. Caleb had not spoken for a full minute. Then he had said, Eleanor. Yes. My mother would have loved you. Caleb. My mother would have loved you more than she loved any of us, and she would have told me so to my face, and she would have been right. The first woman came in October. Her name was Hannah Pritchard. She came off the noon train at Dry Creek Station with a 3-year-old boy and a black eye and a carpet bag, and no money at all, because the man she had been running from had taken her money from her purse the night before she left, and she had got on the train anyway, because the alternative was worse, and she had ridden 400 miles in a daze with her son asleep on her chest. Sheriff Burroughs met her at the platform. He had been expecting her. Reverend Coombs had wired ahead. He said, Ma'am, my name is Sheriff Burroughs. There is a woman out west of town who would like to take you to a house she owns. You are under no obligation to go. You are under no obligation to stay. She asks for no money and no labor. Her name is Mrs. Turner. She has a daughter a little younger than your boy. Would you let me drive you out there, ma'am? Hannah Pritchard had stared at him. She had said, Why? The sheriff had taken his hat off. He had said, Ma'am, because a woman stood on this platform 6 months ago with a baby in her arms and nobody coming for her, and I read her a letter in my office that I still think about. She told me when she came through town last week to pick up a sack of sugar that if I ever saw another one, I was to bring the woman to her, and I was not to ask questions. I am not asking questions, ma'am. I am asking if you will let me drive you. Hannah Pritchard had looked down at her son. She had said, Drive me. Eleanor was on the porch of the Pike House when the wagon came up the road. She had been waiting. She had been waiting in some sense since the moment she had signed her name on the marshal's letter. She had baked bread that morning. She had set out a basin. She had put a quilt on the bed Lydia had helped her make. She had put a jar of Lydia's peach preserves on the kitchen table because Lydia had said, Every woman who walks into that house should find peach preserves on the table. I do not know why. I only know it is true. When the wagon pulled up, Eleanor came down off the porch. She walked across the yard. She stopped beside the wagon and she looked up at Hannah Pritchard, and she did not say anything at first. She looked at the carpet bag. She looked at the black eye. She looked at the little boy asleep on his mother's chest. Then she held up her arms. Hand him to me, she said. Ma'am, he is. Hand him to me. You have been holding him for 400 miles. Give him over. Come down. There is bread on the table. There is water on the stove. There is a bed made up. There is a door that locks, and I will give you the key before the hour is out. You do not owe me a thing. You do not owe anyone a thing. Come down off that wagon, Mrs. Pritchard." Hannah Pritchard began to shake. "Ma'am." "Come down." "Ma'am, I do not—" "Hannah, come down." Hannah Pritchard handed her son to Eleanor. She climbed down off the wagon. She stood in the yard, and she stared at the small weathered house with its straight front step and its whitewashed walls, and she opened her mouth to say something, and no words came out. And Eleanor, with the sleeping boy on her hip, reached out her free hand and took Hannah's hand in her own and said quietly, I know, Hannah. I know every word you are trying to say, and you do not have to say any of them. Come inside. The bread is still warm." Hannah Pritchard came inside, and that was the beginning. The second woman came in November, the third in December. Eleanor lost count somewhere in the second year. Lydia kept a ledger, because Lydia could not stand a thing that was not counted. By the end of the fourth year, the ledger held the names of 19 women and 26 children, and not one of them had paid a cent, and not one of them had been asked to. 2 of the women married local men and stayed in the county. 1 went back east to a mother who had finally written. 1 opened a millinery shop in the next town over. 1 became a schoolteacher. 1, a woman named Clara Webb, moved into the Pike House permanently and ran it alongside Eleanor because Clara had come through with nothing and stayed with everything, and Eleanor had needed a second pair of hands, and Clara had needed a home, and the 2 of them fit together the way some women do. Beatrice Holloway's husband, who had been quietly ashamed of his wife for 31 years, became the banker who held the small account that Eleanor opened for the house. He charged her no fees. He told her once on a Thursday morning that his own mother had been turned out of her father's house at 16 for a reason Beatrice did not know and never would, and that he had been waiting his whole life to do a thing for a woman like that, and that Eleanor had given him the chance, and he would not forget it. Rose Turner grew up calling Caleb Pa. She called him Pa the first time the summer she turned 2. She called him Pa on her wedding day 31 years later on the same porch Eleanor had fixed with her own hands. She called him Pa on the afternoon she buried him when he was 76 years old, and Eleanor was 67, and Caleb had died in his sleep with Eleanor's hand in his, and Rose had walked out to the cottonwood tree behind the Grange Hall and sat under it, and said out loud to nobody, Pa, 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 until the word had worn itself smooth. But all of that was still far ahead. On the afternoon Hannah Pritchard came down off the wagon in Eleanor's yard. Eleanor Turner, who had once been Eleanor Hayes, who had once stood on a train platform in the worst hour of her life with a baby in her arms. And nobody coming, stood in the doorway of a small house she owned outright, with another woman's son, asleep on her hip, and she watched Hannah Pritchard walk across her threshold and sit down at her table, and put her face in her hands and weep. Eleanor did not rush her. She set the little boy down on the floor beside Rose, who was now a year old and walking, and who immediately sat down next to the stranger, as if she had been waiting for him. She poured Hannah a cup of coffee. She set it in front of her. She sat down across the table, and she folded her hands, and she waited. When Hannah lifted her face, she said, "Mrs. Turner, why are you doing this?" And Eleanor Turner, who had rehearsed this answer for 6 months without knowing she was rehearsing it, looked Hannah Pritchard in the eye and gave her the only answer that was ever going to be true. "Because somebody did it for me, Hannah. That is the whole of it. Somebody did it for me, and now I am doing it for you. And one day when you are ready, you are going to do it for the next one. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. The world tried to throw us away, and we are not going to let it throw away the next one." Hannah Pritchard stared at her. Then she reached across the table, and she took Eleanor's hand, and she did not let go of it for a long, long time. Outside, on the small, straight step Eleanor had fixed with her own 2 hands, the afternoon sun came down on the porch of a house that had once belonged to a liar and a coward, and that now, and for as long as Eleanor Turner drew breath, belonged to every frightened woman who would ever come walking up that road with a child in her arms and nowhere left to go. She was not rescued. She was the rescue. And that is the end of the story.